Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Covenant podcast. This is a very different episode because it's just me here. There's no one in the audience of the church, and as you may have noticed, there is also no Brother Beard. I guess maybe you wouldn't have noticed that yet because the camera hasn't cut to him, but there's no Brother Beard. And I want to explain a couple things about the podcast and the future of it. And I want to start all of this off by saying, and ripping off the Band-Aid, that Brother Beard will not be a part of the Fellowship Covenant podcast anymore. I will be the sole host, and I want to be very, very clear that there is no reason, there's no bad blood between us or reason that it happened because of any conflict we had with each other. That is the first thing I need to be like very, very upfront about. Like he is one of my best friends. I really appreciate Ryan, and I think he's got Bambi in the background. I think he's a great content creator. I think he does great work, and we work well together. But there were a series of conversations that we had that ultimately led to us both mutually making the decision that he would be leaving the podcast as the co-host, and that the podcast would kind of end up taking a little bit of a different form. So as of right now, he is on a indefinite mission trip, and it's just me here. And I kind of want to give an explanation of to why, just for the people who have been really supportive for us from the start. And I know it's not a super fun announcement. Sorry, I had to get Bambi and let him in the door. I know it's not a super fun announcement, but it will lead into, an exciting future for what may be the future of the podcast. Now, there's a few things I have to explain, and I want to give an update on where I'm at in my life and make sure I keep everyone up to date. So I'm going to try to do this in a way that's like more like podcast focused and relaxed, even though it's just me, and it's kind of weird having to fill the time with just my voice right now. But that won't really be the future of the podcast, and I will explain that later. Excuse me, man. Excuse me. All right. I had to bring him to the church. My bad. Basically what happened is we had to take about a 3-week period of a break while I decided to move. Well, I made the impromptu choice to move across the country. And so we took a break for that. And, by the time that those 3 weeks were up, it was hard for both of us to feel like we could just jump back into it, because it was honestly a lot of work from the start getting it jump started, doing the branding and trying to find an editor who could work with such a weird specific concept and premise. And so I was editing a lot of the first episodes, and it was kind of taking away from me being able to do stuff with my channel. And then overall planning was really tough because Brother Beard lives in Australia and I was living in Illinois. And so he was 14 and a half hours ahead of me. So we had to record episodes at midnight, my time, and right when he was waking up. And there was a delay with Discord because we're at different continents. And these are all factors that we didn't realize would be so heavy on us when we decided to start the podcast. Even when it comes down to the promotion and getting the episodes out on streaming services, these are things on top of our own jobs that were very tough. And I know cry for me. My job's so tough. I started a podcast about a goddamn not fake religion, what people want to call a fake religion. And I built a massive church, but it was tough, and Ryan is working on a bigger video project right now, and I am currently moving and going through the process of kind of having a crisis about what I want to do with my own channel, which is another conversation we can have later in this little update episode, whatever it is. But yeah, those issues kind of were just logistical issues. Sorry. Bambi really wants to be a part of the episode. He really wants to be the co-host, the new co-host, and I told him he's not allowed because he can't speak English. But he is very, very adamant about it. But yeah, I those issues kind of came up for both of us, and as the weeks went on and we came up on having to come back, we really weren't fully prepared, and it didn't really feel like the podcast was easy to continue to produce. We had fun shooting it, but the process of doing it and also splitting up work when it comes to like editing videos and posting things on YouTube, it's really hard to like have two people in that space and have both of them be able to carry a lot of different jobs, because the process is so like made for one person across the board. It's like editing the video and making the thumbnail and putting it out. It's hard to pass that back and forth when you're both on two sides of the world and you're both also working on other things. And so the communication there was tough for obvious reasons. But again, I want to reiterate, none of that stuff was personal. I think Ryan is going to put out his own like little thing about it today on his social media. But we have talked about the way that we want to present it, the places we want to take the podcast, and all of that. So those are a lot of the major reasons. It was tough to see a really long future for something that I felt like could have a lot of potential. But when you have a lot of those issues week to week, and then you have your own life stuff, it's really hard to continue to churn out podcast episodes and try to keep people engaged and come up with new ideas for the podcast while also trying to run two other channels and move. And then, Ryan's on the other side of the world doing a completely different, bigger video project while also trying to work on both his channels. And, we're both, we both are basically working on opposite times of the day. So, that was a major reason why, and it was hard to see the longevity of the podcast through that. And so we had a conversation about where we want to take the future of it. And basically where we landed was that, it was uncomfortable for Ryan to want to leave this show. He really, I don't want anyone to think that he didn't care about it or that he didn't have like a fun time while he was shooting it, or that it was some kind of like, there was weird stuff behind the scenes. It was really fun to shoot, and we had a fun time coming up with new ideas, and it was always fun trying to figure out where we wanted to take the storyline, and those things are still going to exist within the world of the Fellowship Covenant podcast and are things that I'm excited to do, but we had to kind of recontextualize what the show would be in order to keep it alive. And so really the only path we could take it, if we weren't going to stop it altogether, which was an option, stopping the podcast as a whole was definitely something that we thought about, because, we started it together and it was an idea we both cared about, and it obviously feels weird, but we are in the infancy of it. We're 7 episodes into it. It's barely started, and it's a concept that I hold very near and dear to my heart. It's a concept that I worked a lot with Day Off Limited. I want to link them in the description down below. They're the ones that have done all the branding for this, and they are my favorite people to work with in the world. They're doing the graphic design for Daily December. They made the Queef Jerky album cover art. They made the Nick is Not Green phone case. They are like such a joy to work with, and they're just as invested in the world of all of this as you guys are, and I want to make sure that I give them credit whenever I can, because none of this would be the way it was without them. And there's so much more that they've made that I'm excited to show to you guys in the future, and we will have the chance to show it. But basically the only other way we could really take it without ending it outright, what was I saying? I'm getting ahead of myself. The concept I hold very, very dear to my heart. I really loved the way we branded it. I loved the idea of it. I love how engaged the community is, and that's something that I would be really sad to let go of. Like it would pain me a lot to like have to drop that after a couple months, and especially because I feel like we've grown a really tight community, and it's something that I haven't felt since I first started YouTube, and since I was first growing, and I had people who all knew each other, who were like a part of the community of people. And so that's something I care about, and also just the concept of being able to, use this as sort of like a gateway to talk a little bit more about my thoughts on religion and talk to people and friends of mine about their experiences with religion. It's something that I think has a lot of potential, and that's not even potential when it just comes to the podcast part of it, but when it comes to the community parts of it and the things that friends can be a part of, and live shows and the future of like what clothing would look like under the church and all this stuff is very exciting to me. And so, the option that we decided to go with was that I would, take over as the sole host. And, we're still trying to work out a lot of the logistics of what we want the show to be. But my idea was, we're 7 weeks into this thing, and it's very much in its infancy. And like this, this is an era of the Fellowship Covenant podcast that will evolve into this new thing as I move and as we come into the new year. And maybe in another year, another few months, is going to evolve into something else. And we have this channel and we have this podcast that's already doing things that I don't think a lot of podcasts are doing, which I think gives us the ability to take it in a lot more ways. And so I like the idea of not really defining it to this one thing. And although I think Ryan is and was an integral part of the podcast, I do feel like the community is there to kind of support this idea through what might be like an awkward change and an awkward transition for the podcast, but what will ultimately just be a next step for something that will hopefully keep growing and at least cultivate this community of people that I think are excited about what we could have in store. So the idea is that I want to be able to bring people physically into the church, as in my own house, and it's hard to maintain the world of the podcast while also talking about real life things, but physically bringing people into my space and basically doing like an interview show, but a little more based around the world of Gormu, of course, because he is ultimately the final answer to all of this. And then also to be able to talk to people about their experiences with religion and how, living in a world where there are so many different beliefs when it comes to spiritual things, and how interesting of a concept that is, and how we interact with each other because of it. Because I feel like everyone has a different experience to share, and I don't think there are a lot of places for people to be able to do stuff like that. Like, I don't know, if I ask you how many of your YouTubers, like how aware you are of their religious background, you're going to say not a lot of them. I'm not really sure. And I do think that things like that are big catalysts for what will end up defining who a person is, that not just religion, but other facets of life too. But growing up in religion, I know, in the Christian church has heavily affected who I am and how I make decisions and how I go about interacting with people or making choices about things I want to do in my life. And so I like learning that about other people while also trying to convince them to join my church, because my church is the best church. Not my church, of course, Gormu's church. Me and the prophets aren't the ones that run all this, but that's, besides the point. Today's not a day to get into lore. And so I do want to hear from you guys what you would really like to see from it, because my idea of it is to have, a nice one camera shot with me and a new prophet, a new possible prophet, and be able to talk to them about, about whatever it pertains, convincing them to join the religion, their religious past, what they're, just having real conversations and bringing new people in and being able to like build the world around bringing guests in and sort of introducing them into this. Because a big thing with the old podcast is Ryan and I were always on the same page when it came to where the lore was at and the history of the church and all this stuff. And so when you had a new person jump into the podcast at episode 6 or 7, maybe it's harder for them to understand who Gormu is and Gormu's house and this and that. And I think bringing in people who aren't entirely into this world and aren't as insane as all of us are, I think would be funny to try to explain to them this weird world we've created with Ryan. By Ryan, I of course mean Brother Beard. And to also be easy for new people to come in and be like, okay, so the guest is also confused, and it might lead them to feel a little more welcome. So I would like to hear from people what they think would be interesting things, like what aspects of the old show, when it comes to reading verses or the prayers or the confessions, like what aspects of those do you think would fit well into a show that was mainly about, interviewing other guests here and there. So that's where we're kind of at with the podcast. I think it's a really weird time in my life because it is, Ryan decided to, part ways, and we decided to make the decision for me to stand on my own with it. But at the same time, I am also not in the greatest headspace right now. At least in terms of where I am with YouTube, I think this is probably the toughest time I've ever had since I started doing it full time, trying to figure out what I want to do with my channel while also feeling like I'm sort of losing my career at the same time. I think it's harder to see from the outside. I think it's easier for me to say that when I'm completely surrounded by my own work. But it's hard. I haven't felt passionate about a project that isn't this podcast in a long time. And so when I go to my own channels, it feels very uncomfortable because it feels like I'm trying to do this job that is a job. It's something that I need to maintain if I want to continue to do what I'm doing. And so when it becomes a job more than it becomes me working on these projects I'm excited about, it's hard for me to feel super amped about, the fact that the numbers aren't as good. And I also don't have ideas for new videos. And I'm also, in the midst of moving, and I have a lot of big changes in my life. And I have issues with Bambi trying to readjust to the new place, and a slew of mental health problems as I try to transfer all of my doctors and health professionals over across the country to a new state. And I am happy that I moved, and I do think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities. Something like an in-person interview show with, in a big frickin' church in Los Angeles is a lot easier in Los Angeles than it is in like suburban Illinois, which is where I was before. And so I do think that this is going to be a good future for me. I just think that currently it is the hardest that it's been, in terms of feeling like I have a concrete understanding of what my career is and where it's going to be, because currently I have a lot of fears that I'm watching it, slip through my fingers, and I'm watching my audience sort of leave as I struggle to understand what I'm good at and what I'm passionate about creating. I feel like that's an issue that people don't really see that much once you're doing it full time and once you're making, a lot of money to be able to support yourself and your family. But I think now more than ever, knowing that this is something I use to support myself, it becomes harder to be like, okay, maybe I need to pull back on posting so much to do something I'm passionate about, even though it won't support me as much. But then the other part of that is what I would love to do that, but what am I passionate about? So these are things that I think it will help to be able to try something new and to get into a show where I can meet new people and collaborate a little bit more. But I do want to say, for people that do watch my content outside of the podcast, I don't know who was here from Ryan's audience, and we have a lot of crossover, so I'm sure it's not too much. But I do want to say, there is a very big growing period right now with where I'm at, and it's hard for me to watch that and feel like I'm not embarrassed in a sense. And I don't want to get too emotional about it, but it's hard for me to not feel like I am not like putting out lower, not trying hard enough for my audience. And realistically, it's hard, and I'm a sad guy, and I'm doing my best to get to the point where I'm proud of what I make, and I'm excited to show people. And it's been a long time since then, but also I need to remember that that's okay. The requirement to get into doing YouTube is not to consistently make videos that you're amped about and that you're excited to show people, although that is the benefit of having the job, is that I'm able to do that. But the issue is finding the thing that I want to do. And so all that to say that, I do want to say that the podcast, I forgot to say this earlier. While I try to figure out what the future of it is, it will maybe take, I would say, hopefully starting in January, a month from now, we can pick it back up and have guests. And I know that sucks to say that, like, we gotta wait another month. But I have to get a bigger green screen for my office so I can fit 2 people. I have to get 2 chairs, 2 microphones, do the whole podcast setup. I can't really just do it from my YouTube setup anymore. So taking the time to set that up and find guests. I don't even know if the podcast will be weekly or if we'll have to do it bi-weekly, because it's going to be hard to find guests and bring them to my house and do all this stuff. I will want to ask if you guys think there would be an interest in doing, a guest every other week and then somehow having a solo episode every other week also. But, I don't know how I don't know how comfortable I feel filling an hour of time. I mean, I've been filling 20 minutes of time just fine. I'm good talking by myself. But also, do I want to do that every week? I talk enough. You guys have heard enough of my voice. I think it's time to hear from other people. And at some point I do want to talk about more of my own personal experience with religion and just talk more about my life in a sense that doesn't feel like I'm just shoehorning it at the end of videos and stuff. But it would be interesting whether we talk about confessions or we have people call in, whatever you guys think. If you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments. I'd love to see you guys replying to other comments and maybe building off of them. I really want this to feel like a tight-knit community that can kind of grow as we develop what the podcast is and what we want it to become. Because at the end of the day, what is it? What is fellowship? What is engaging in fellowship if it's just me sitting here and yapping and telling you guys what I'm going to do? I want people to tell me what they're interested in too, because I really want this to grow with me and with you guys, and I want us to feel confident that it is going to grow into something that is exciting for people to watch and engage in, and is also fun and brings a lot of new memes and jokes and inside stuff that we got to experience over the 7 episodes that we did. So there will be a lot of guests to come. There's a lot up in the air in terms of what that will be. I want to remind people who are on the Patreon that if you are on the Patreon and you don't want to pay $2 for the past 2 months of whatever, I totally understand, and I just want to remind you that you can opt out of that. I do want to say that I will do my best to make up for the lack of Patreon stuff. Luckily, it's only $2 a month, so I hope no one is too angry, but $2 is $2, and I don't want to take your money and promise you something and not make up for it. So I will make good on the Patreon, and if anyone has ideas for how I can do that, let me know. But I since the show will be continuing, I don't want to shut down the Patreon and bring it back up. But I will continue to always keep it at $2 because I want as many people to feel like they're a part of the church. And that goes into supporting the show. All that money is right now is at least directly supporting what will become the show and what we're going to be able to do with it. But whether or not you do support it, it is going to happen. Don't that is for you and you only to decide for yourself. What else? Do I have anything else I got to talk about? But I moved. It was a disaster. It was a myriad of problems that went wrong. But nothing permanently is affecting my stay here. I enjoy the weather so far. I've gotten to hang out with a lot of my friends. And I'm excited for the future of what I get to do, despite the fact that my content feels like I'm losing my career now more than ever. But I will say that I do think this is going to be an exciting change, an exciting future for the show. I cannot thank you guys enough for jumping on to this like really weird idea we had. And, I'm sorry if we let you down in any way by feeling like, by promising you something that we weren't able to fully, fulfill. It's not fun for me to like have to make this big change and not to have Ryan working on the show anymore. And again, he's going to put out his own statement on it. But just know that there's a lot of, we're still very good friends. There's a lot of communication between us to figure out what would best, what would be the best conclusion for the problems we had. And yeah, I am hopeful that everyone else is at least on board with the idea of this show taking a different form. If you're not, and you think that this idea sucks, and you think I need to cut the show off because only half of the show, half of the hosts are here now, you let me know. Maybe a lot of the people, maybe everyone was here for Ryan, and everyone was like, that brother Green sucks, but at least we can deal with it because we have brother Beard. And then he leaves, and everyone's like, okay, but I'm gonna head out now then. But no, thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll come back with all of our goofy church things. I love what people were doing in the Twitter communities and in the comments. And I've met a lot of people in person who will come up to me and say like praise Gormu or praise B, which is like so surreal to me. And yeah, I'm very grateful for the stuff that this podcast has brought in such a short amount of time. And I'm hoping that this becomes just a small era of what will become a much bigger concept and a much bigger show. And of course, I hope Brother Beard will come back from his mission trip one day and at least say hi every once in a while. And I'm sure he will. I'm sure down the line we are going to, hopefully he'll be able to come over to America at some point. We've been talking about that too. And at least be a recurring guest. So yeah, I mean, that's all I gotta say. I know this went on longer than I thought. I thought it would be like 10 minutes, but I've been talking for half an hour. So yeah, again, thank you for watching. I appreciate you. We will be back soon with something that I hope is exciting to you guys. But I've been talking in circles, so why don't I head out? Okay? Appreciate you all. Have a great rest of your day. Praise be.